Welcome to the Gulenko Business and Recruitment Show. I record these while walking. While my guest today, Ryan, is not walking, but he still will obviously contribute with his 20 years of experience in software engineering. We will talk about artificial intelligence and the impact on software engineering and obviously software engineer recruitment. So, Ryan, I tell you a story. I just talked to like a person, basically your experience level, 20 years in the business, and they're like, yes, this junior engineers, they basically use the AI tools all the time, and then they read the AI output, they follow it, and then it's wrong. And then they basically waste 5 hours doing what the AI told them to do, instead of doing the things the old good way, read the manual. So basically, my gut feel about all this is that due to AI, yes, we have much faster processes, but then you have also lots of time waste in other places. So we end up in the end in the same place that software engineering just takes. Just we have some things take shorter, but then other things take longer, like debugging. What's your thought on that?
First and foremost, thanks for having me on your show. Yeah, that's an interesting thought that you have. With the advent of kind of all these AI tools, I personally use AI pretty much all day long. And I think they're very, very powerful tools. But to your point, I think these powerful tools used in the wrong hands can be very complicated, right? So I think the current state of AI, I say this all the time, AI is very, very smart and very, very dumb at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I find that a lot of my use of it, uh, is you kind of have to know, right, about the subject matter you're already working on. And then you have to know,
Mm-hmm.
you have to have kind of a sense of taste or a sense of bullshit when the AI comes back and tells you something, right? And then you can prompt it again. You can be like, no, 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 that doesn't make any sense. How about this, right? And it'll generate the code correctly. So I find myself doing a lot of that. It does hallucinate a lot. Um, with the ability to look up on the internet, it's a bit better, right? So GPT 4.0, if you use kind of the chat interface, right? If you ask it a question, now it now searches the web all the time with whatever their search product is, and I find that does a little bit better, but it still has a tendency to hallucinate. So I think
Mm-hmm.
if you're very experienced in a field or you're very experienced in kind of the language or frameworks that you're working on, they're very, very
Mm-hmm.
powerful tools. You can code really, really quickly, but on the flip side, if you're a junior and you're just kind of thrown into the deep end, it turns into kind of a mess of probabilistic software engineering, right? And I, my instinct is that currently, given the state of these tools and the skill set of these tools, um, like you said, it's kind of a trade-off. They can produce a lot of stuff a lot more quickly, and sometimes it works, and sometimes they go down rabbit holes. If I had to guess, I would guess that even with junior engineers, it's faster, right? Junior engineers will read documentation and go down kind of the rabbit holes you're talking about anyway, right? Because they don't have a lot of experience
Ah,
in
I
the
see.
field, right? So my guess is it's still more productive, but in the hands of people who have been doing this a long time with oversight, I think it's like super, super productive, right? So for me, engage with these tools in many capacities. I use Cursor with Claude. I use GPT via the chat
Mm-hmm.
interface. I use Perplexity, though I'm using that a lot less
Mm-hmm.
now given the search feature of GPT. But
Mm-hmm.
for me, I interact with them all day long, and I find my productivity has gone up order of magnitude at least.
All right. Yeah, I hear you that you're like positive about using AI in software engineering. I know also you're positive about like self-driving cars. Like you use the Tesla functionality that's available in California like all the time to basically, yeah, let the car drive you. And in both instances, you said something super interesting that I'm not sure how I feel about this. Just like, okay, the software is doing stuff and you just have to observe, right?
Yep.
So this sounds like, of course, like, oh, uh, this is like easier in, you know, but is it really? Because like for me today, um, I had my worker, right? They had to fill a form that I usually fill, and I do it like on autopilot. All the fields, I read them, fill them. What they did was, told them, okay, do this. All I had to do was like read it and look over it, right? And of course,
Sure.
if I check other people's work, I did much faster. So basically, a mistake happened. The client was unhappy. This wouldn't have happened if I would have done the whole thing. Because if I do the whole thing, I have the feeling of flow. Definitely, this is what you feel if you're programming, right? But here, basically, I outsourced this simple task, right? And then because I was just checking it, I missed basically the mistake. So the same with self-driving cars, right? You sit at the wheel and then you do stuff. At the same time, maybe think of stuff or glimpse on your phone or whatever, and then mistakes happen. So basically, you have friends that also say they don't like the self-driving functionality of Tesla because of that, because then it makes you basically become lazy. And people say this argument, I guess, all the time. And what you say, like, isn't just maybe like some people don't like this stuff, right? They just like rather do everything themselves, and this is how some people just are.
So I think there's a personality component to this, what you like and what you don't like. Um, And then if you look at kind of the range of abilities, right? There's a range of abilities in which you're okay with as a self-driving car and you're not, right? And every release gets better, every release moves along on this curve, and it
Mm-hmm.
just depends on what your tolerance is and what how much you want to pay attention, right? Tesla does a good job, especially with the newer versions, with monitoring, driver monitoring. So if you look at your phone, it freaks out, right? So you can't actually do that. You
Mm-hmm.
have to watch the road. I personally think that so this is again my
Sure,
argument, right?
but it
I
doesn't
think that
look inside your brain, right? It doesn't look if you're
sure, it
dreaming
does not.
away in your head. So like,
It does not. But I personally do not have this problem, right? So I know that some people do, and some people are just different. So I personally find that I believe that driving is the most dangerous thing that human beings do currently, day to day, right? So I believe that I've always made this argument, right? Once the self-driving gets good enough, the combination of a self-driving car and a human being is safer than one or the other, right?
mm-hmm.
And this is kind of a tangent from the software conversation, but maybe not, right? So the way a human fails in driving is very different than the way a machine fails, right? A human will not pay attention and run into a car in front of it that suddenly stops, right?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't very, very, very rarely happens on a full self-driving car without any sort of like weird edge case, right?
Mm-hmm.
The self-driving car might not like it'll freak out, it'll like try to go on the wrong road or something, right? But for the most part, from a safety critical perspective, it fails in very different ways than a human. So I made the
Mm-hmm.
argument that, at least for me, and this is probably in the last year or two, that it really just crossed the line. And I argue that me supervising a self-driving car is far safer than either by themselves currently, right? And as the
Mm-hmm.
functionalities improve, it'll probably reach a point where me supervising does nothing, right? But currently, I make the argument that because I pay attention the entire time, right? Because I think it's important to pay attention the whole time, and I find it much more pleasant just to watch, right? And also, if you drive enough, right, you kind of know, right? You instinctively know, and maybe that's because I'm a software engineer, right? But you kind of instinctively know the situations where the car doesn't like and the
Mm-hmm.
car likes, right? And if you drive the same roads over and over again, right, you really know, right? It doesn't like this or
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't like that, right? So then, that kind of handoff for me anyways it's much more pleasant. I like 99% of the time it's doing it. I go, okay, I know it's going to screw up here, take over, right? So um and as time goes on, those interventions get fewer and fewer and fewer, and currently the build that's released right now is very, very good. It drives a little too slowly for my taste, but from a safety perspective, I haven't had safety critical interventions in a very long time.
So driving, I would say, it's good that we talked about this because obviously it showcases a little bit, like, I would say the world you live in is like basically software engineers, and the world I live in, where it's like basically very different people, like recruiters, business people, software engineers, and it's really like, you know, different people. Like some people, they would just, not be capable of doing certain actions. I think it's really like, the habits you have is the habits you have. This is kind of like, mm, I would say people like have a really hard time actually changing, right? So if
Yeah,
somebody, mm, yeah, is basically confronted with like the like, because you need to behave differently, as you said, like you can't just start, oh, the car drives and then they'll just like don't pay attention anymore, and you don't do it, and like people who, let's say, have the value system of like, you know, security, preventing stuff rather than, uh, living the day, like just, just not, from today. We say in German, like live the day, don't really think about tomorrow. You're
Sure.
the type of person that, you know, thinks ahead. So basically, then the majority of people is not like you. The majority of people is not like software engineers. So now we have technology like self-driving cars, and this is for everybody. But going
Yeah.
back to software engineering, that basically like, of course, only like, let's say, already people do that like attracted to that. It's a different kind of people, but also it's a different kind of task. It's much more complicated. So here with cars, as you say, you learn very easily, okay, the car is doing this, the car is doing that. So now with software engineering, however, it's completely different complexity level, right? It's like not, oh,
Yes.
go left, go right, but it's like, okay, now this thing wrote me like a whole blob of front and back end that like is doing something, and now I'll just copy paste this into my current code base. And that is probably something that
Yeah.
happens all over again. So, but still, so you would say, basically going back to the very first point where I complained that like, okay, the junior engineer saves 5 hours by using AI, but then they lose 5 hours by like, doing the wrong thing. You say, of course, in net. So basically net is still like faster because you do so many things, basically on autopilot now that you didn't do before
Yeah, I
on
think
autopilot. You basically had to talk out, like really type stuff and doing
yeah.
stupid stuff, right? Like for example, static typing is one topic, or like with languages where it's not static type, but now you have like editors like support that's not only that static typing, but you have also like really you talked about this before in our previous like private chat. That like it knows where you're in the like file, so it goes. So basically, you maybe you can talk about that. So you have a
Yeah.
function, and then you. Mm,
I'll talk about it from like a Ruby on Rails perspective, since you know
mm,
that's my favorite. Um, I use Cursor with Claude. Um, it's very, very good at knowing what you're doing, right? So I'll
mm,
give you an example, right? I generate a Rails migration where I want to add some fields to it. Let's use an example. I want to add some fields to the existing model that I have, right? And
mm,
because I generated the migration and then went into the file and added, right? Like, okay, these are the fields I need to add. When I go into the model, the code knows that I generated that migration, and the autocomplete will autocomplete exactly
mm,
what I'm looking for a lot of the time. I would say majority of the time, I just have to hit tab once I get into the model, and it knows exactly what I want to put there, right? So like this, but I will have this caveat. Sometimes it messes up, right? Because it's guessing. Sometimes it tries
mm,
to be smart and changes something, and it's guessing, right? So that's where I think it's kind of like the self-driving car. When I use cursor and code, I'm watching and I'm thinking about every line of code that's generated, right?
mm,
So I think one of the interesting things that I've kind of learned over time is the size of the size of what you're asking the code to do is important, right? So this is very, very simple that I'm talking about, very small, right? It's just auto completing maybe a field or an association or something on a Rails model, right? But you can ask it to do bigger things too, right? And over time, you kind of get a feel for how big of a thing can I ask it, right? If I ask it to do something too big, then it messes up and it produces gibberish, it produces bugs. Um, then you have to go and manually debug,
mm,
right? So I learned this kind of in real time when I was writing a WordPress plugin, right? Where I was using Claude and I was letting it generate like large portions of kind of the like the admin screens, right? Where you the settings
mm.
screens where you put stuff into the screens.
So
And
basically, CRUD, like really stupid CRUD apps where
really,
it's like,
really
okay,
basic
this is the
CRUD.
fields, and then it goes like in like. I
Yeah.
mean, doesn't Django and Ruby on Rails they anyway did it before, way before AI, exactly the same
But it's
stuff to generate an admin? I think it's part of Django framework for like a long time,
It
or something.
is, but
Like, I
now
mean,
you can do
kind of.
more stuff, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
sure, like Rails, I can generate. Like that was one of the famous 15-minute blog. When DHH released Rails, right? The 15-minute blog. There's like generators and scaffolds that produce a bunch of code for you, right? So code gen has existed for a very long time, um, and there is a trade-off. I forgot who posted this on X, but someone was arguing that part of the nice thing about code gen is that it's human tailored, right? So you know what comes out. It's deterministic and it's tested, and every time will produce the same result. And AI is very non-deterministic, right? Um, just even by design, right? They use temperature values that are produce some sort of randomness that comes out of the AI, right? So you can do it 10 times and get 10 different answers. Maybe eight of them are correct, maybe two of them are wrong, right? So it's kind of this probabilistic workflow versus a very specific deterministic workflow. And it can be annoying sometimes. I don't disagree, especially when you're fighting with the AI, right? But like the reason why I brought up the WordPress instance is it sounds like a very simple CRUD app, right? But if you ask it to do too big of a chunk of work, it screws up, right? It will. Here's just a good example, right? I had a settings screen, which had a bunch
Mm-hmm.
of different fields, right? And I grouped them into two separate like categories.
Mm-hmm.
um, when I told AI to write this, it created two forms with the same ID and they would override each other. Right. So like
Mm-hmm.
then I was like, okay, this is too big. I have to target each form individually and tell it what I want to do. Right. So that's one of the things you learn is that you have to scope the problem that you give AI very specifically. And it's much
Mm-hmm.
better at much at smaller scopes versus larger scopes. And now
Yeah.
we have like O1, right, with these like reasoning and iterative, right? It's all probabilistic. And I think as the
Mm-hmm.
models get better and better, the scope will get bigger. But in my experience, at least, scoping the problem and knowing what to ask and knowing what to prompt is really, really important.
I see. Yeah. I mean, if you like have a very complex system, right? Like a new car or let's say a system where there's so many moving parts, it's always like overwhelms, I would say, most people, right? It's like this, okay, you have to babysit the actual new tool. So if I sit in a car where it's like, cruise control, driver assistance, even yeah, this is at the beginning especially. It's like, oh, this disturbs me. If you use it, especially if
Yes.
you at the beginning you might use the tool in the wrong way. And this happened to me. You know me, right? I told many times this is dumb. And then of
Yeah.
course you get
Yeah.
used to it, but like in the beginning you always say like, okay, this is dumb. And then maybe if you like do the effort, then you become better at using this new tool, right? So,
Yeah, I think
mm,
it's just kind of a personality thing too. Some people hate change more
mm,
than others, right?
mm,
Everybody hates change, I think, to some extent, right? Because like your workflows and your instincts get broken whenever you change things, and it is annoying. I
mm,
don't disagree. I try really hard that if I change something because I know it's better, I have to just be calm about it in the beginning, right? And my drive is toward efficiency and my drive is toward productivity. So that's my like pretty much number one concern. So I know that
mm,
like if I pick, for example, I didn't jump into Cursor right away, right? Because I didn't want to upend my workflow. I was using VS Code. Um, I was using Claude as the chat and then like copying code into it. And after about a few weeks of that, I finally downloaded Cursor. Um, our friend Mike is the one who was like, "Yeah, you should try it. I really like it," and I ended up really really liking it. Right, Cursor has all these built-in diff tools that allow you to apply
mm,
changes. Right, it allows you to code gen from within the file itself. It allows you to edit
mm,
code from within the file itself. It's really really pleasant. It's like an AI first experience, and ever since then, like it's been off to the races. Right, the amount of output I can produce is just so much higher. And one of the good examples of this as well is that now I can enter like different programming languages or programming like just different systems altogether that I don't know at all, right?
mm,
And again, this is what we kind of talked about in the beginning with just knowing when the AI is hallucinating and when the AI is not hallucinating, right? Even though I don't know a new system, right? If I jump into a new system and the AI says something that doesn't really feel right, right, from like a software engineering
mm,
perspective, then you ask it to clarify, right? But as a junior, you wouldn't know that, right? You would just try it, right? So a lot of, if you look at O1, I think O1 does this too, right? But a lot of what happens when I'm coding, as I mentioned before, is it says something and I'm like, that's not quite right. Or it says something, I'm like, how about this approach? And I'd be like, yeah, that's a better approach, right? And it'll switch to that, right? And I don't
mm,
have to even try the first approach because I know it's wrong, right? And
mm,
I think that skill over time, obviously, as junior engineers, use it more and more and improve and learn more software engineering, this will get better. And if you want to pay attention and you want to learn from this, you'll get better as well. But it requires effort. It's kind of like the same example as self-driving cars, right? You have to be engaged all the time. And if you're engaged with AI tools, even as a younger engineer, if you go down that wrong route the first time, right, for 5 hours, you're gonna be like, huh, okay. And then if you do that a few times, that particular failure of the AI, you'll understand, and then you'll be more like me. You'll skip it. You're like, no, 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 no. I've tried this. It doesn't make any sense. How else can you solve this problem, right? So if you're engaged and you're thinking and you're learning through the process, don't look at it as like vomiting code and you're done. You'll actually improve as an engineer much, much faster, in my opinion. Right. I think the final dream of this, obviously, is that you don't have to care, right? Because the code is dirty. It produces dirty code a lot of the time. It produces bad code a lot of the
Mhm.
time, right? And you have to go clean it up. But as the models improve, this will get less and less. But I don't think we're currently in that state, right? So that you have to be engaged with the tool and you have to look at the code and you have to think about the code every step of the way. Or at least that's what has worked really well for me.
Hmm. So the end result of this is yet again, don't be lazy, but this
Yes.
time in a really, mm, let's say, basically non-stop way, right? You have to, yeah,
Yeah, I
really
really
all the
like
time.
your self-driving car example is really good, right? Because that's how I feel about it. Like you cannot let up. You have to always pay attention, right? And if you're always paying attention, these tools are just, at least for me, so productive that I can't imagine, right? I can't imagine going back, right? You throw me into a new system I don't understand, it will take me 10, 20 times longer, right? To wrap my head around it. With I can just send it the code base and be like, okay, I'm trying to solve this problem. Tell me where the code does this, right? And instead of having to trace through the code and opening files and doing this, especially in a code base I don't understand and it has a lot of indirection, right? Like let's say a bad code base or a bad framework that has messy code, a lot of indirection. The AI can like find the needle in the haystack, right? It says, go look over there. And I find this like super powerful and super like it's such a productivity improvement.
I believe there will be or is already instances where just like I give you an example. Like just recently we had like a legalese problem. Not really problem. It was just a question that in general question that I had, and we asked AI, and then it gave basically the answer that I like loaded into the question, and then some somebody else, like some legal expert, actually said, no, this is like everybody believes this, but this is incorrect. The right answer is this more specific thing. And then I like with this knowledge, obviously like got from the AI the legally correct answer, and I
Yeah.
feel it will be exactly the same what you just said with the okay searching the code base for something, it will guide you somewhere, and now because you lost the ability to like do this process manually, you will be bitten by the result. You will have like a problem in the end. It's now right now, right, due to Google Maps and all that, nobody knows anymore how to like remember roads and remember like navigating stuff without a navigation system, and or people forgot how to like do addition in their head. I know you're very good at that, but like people don't really, they can't like add, I don't know, 25 until plus 77 or something. So
Yeah,
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 some
I know.
people say, well, who cares, like basically this is how it is. Others say, well, yeah, your brain will basically like deteriorate. So if we have now this AI tools, basically the result would be we will build systems that we have like some parts we just don't, because my like one of the best software like people I worked with, like my former boss, like shout out to Marcel. I remember he would have the code base of like giant systems like completely in his head. and and yeah, this is why he was useful to the company, right? He would like not have like like he would just do stuff and he would output so much code by himself and keep the like all the context in his head. Now if AI is generating the like, then kind of like you don't have anymore the full IKEA effect, right? First, like maybe you do get satisfaction obviously because you get quicker results, but
now you also like, I don't know, like there's two aspects I'm attacking right now. First one, maybe questions for you, like which ability you see people will not have anymore in 10 years, and then like will software engineering will be like satisfactory in another way and not like as full like because this lack of IKEA effect, let's say. Maybe these two
Yeah.
thoughts, and that would be
So
fantastic
I think
if you a little bit.
uh, I don't think you're wrong in the sense that, of course, if AI is generating more, like we're basically creating an abstraction layer, right? A new abstraction layer.
Mm,
I will argue, right? Yes, I think it's important to understand, and I think actually to this point, I do drive sometimes, right? Because I think it's
mm,
important to be able to drive, right? If I the vast 90 plus percent of the time I'm driving, the car is driving, but I
mm,
do take an effort to drive sometimes because I'm like,
mm,
this skill never should go away, right?
mm,
However, that's because the system itself isn't good enough. If Tesla's FSD was 100 times better than a human, like there's no point anymore, right? So it's kind of the same argument that people use
mm,
with like abstractions in software, right? Who codes in assembly, right? Like almost nobody, right? So
mm,
like there's abstractions upon abstractions, and of course you lose something, right? Knowing how to, for example, we can look at memory management. This was quote unquote solved a long time ago, right? First
mm,
with Java and garbage collection, and now everyone's like talking about Rust and everything else, right? If you don't have to manage
mm,
pointers and you don't have to free memory, you're deleting a whole class of security bugs and everything else, right? And I tend to agree with that, right? Once that abstraction layer is good enough, right? I don't manage memory anymore. Now,
mm,
obviously, you want to think
mm,
about it, right? You want to know, okay, I'm creating objects, I'm not creating too many. Like it's something that should be in the back of your mind. But there's no point in time now in my day-to-day life where I think about manual memory management,
mm.
right? So I think the dream, this has always been the dream. They've been talking about this forever, and maybe we're getting close. I don't know. But the dream is then to abstract away the code into just plain English, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you can understand the whole system because you understand the English. In fact, you could have specs, right, that are written all in English, or even put it right next to the code as a comment, right, or something, right? So you understand what English produced this code, and now the abstraction layer is English. I don't know. That's always been the fantasy. We're not, in my opinion, we're not that close to that, but we're seeing the glimpses of what that possible future can be. But in the current time, I agree with you, right? Like these skills are really important, and not having these skills will produce worse and buggy code over time, right? Especially when humans have to manage it, right? So I do think it's important to, again, right, look at your code that's generated, think about the code that's generated, talk to AI in bite-sized pieces so that the systems that I build, I still understand. Obviously, you can't hold whole systems in your head that easily, right? There's only a finite. Once it gets big enough, it's hard. But I still at
Mm,
least understand what's what, where's where, and this is also why I think the frameworks are important, right? Coding and frameworks that make it easier to do this um, with less code, right? That's why I've always been a proponent of Ruby on Rails, right? The whole kind of concept of convention over configuration. There's just less code. And I was actually telling
mm,
somebody this the other day, and I haven't completely fleshed the idea out, but I was like, at least for me, using Rails and Ruby is one of the languages that is closer to English, right,
mm.
than other languages, right? There's a lot of convention over configuration. There's a lot of stuff that happens under the covers. So I think AI is probably better suited at dealing with this too, right? Because then it doesn't have to write as much code. The less code you have to write, the less ability it has to mess up, right? So I found that like I've been very pleasantly surprised with the intersection of Rails with Cursor and Claude because like it just feels like it feels like cheating almost. The productivity it gains, it's like a productivity hack that produces so much more quickly results without, in my opinion, too much of a loss in understanding as long as you take the steps to supervise and focus.
So basically, the mixture with specifically Ruby on Rails you find extra attractive because like it is suited for each other more
In
than other languages.
Yeah, at least for me, like at least the way I think about it, right?
Mm,
I'm sure like, the PHP code it generates is fine, right? When I write WordPress plugins and stuff, but there's
mm.
just more stuff, right? It's just busier, right? So it's harder for me to look at it instantly know what's happening, right? Because there's more stuff. right? So like the boilerplate and everything else is much less because that's what one of the like premises like DHH was really mad about. He calls them XML setups. How much XML do I have to write to configure a system? I shouldn't have to write any of
Mhm.
this. It should just be all under the covers. You should not have to think about it, and everything should just work, right? And I just find that because I have to write so much less code and the code is so much more compact, it's easier for me to wrap my head around as I'm working with AI. I even find this, like I said, with the WordPress versus Ruby. The WordPress stuff is messier. There's more code. It's uglier code. It's harder to read. So I find that it takes more effort to have this workflow than it does for Rails. And it could just be because I've done Rails for so long and I'm good at Rails. That could very well be the answer. But that's just my instinct as I've used all these systems.
So with like self-driving cars, people would say stuff like, well, if they're all interconnected, then you have this like massive risk that like, mm, there's like, okay, less risk that like they see each other and they can like, talk to each other such that like the smaller accidents happen less, but then there might be one catastrophic giant accident. Same with like the banking system, right? It's like, okay, they do that stuff to make it like less, uh, and bad in one area, but then they created potential for catastrophic
Sure.
risks. And with like this kind of mm, would you say there's something like I have my gut feel like just shows into this direction that like oh it gets pleasant, but then where is the big like maybe there's like one big minus that comes along with all of this? Like for example, wasn't there a thing like like I don't know like maybe if people use this to write like the SSL stuff that like you remember somebody like there was like a giant
Yeah.
problem and there was fake like do you see on the horizon like so basically to you're the positive person, I'm the negative person obviously in this conversation and maybe in general because like American culture is positive about anything, but I'm rambling around. Just could you think of one thing where it's like this is like the biggest risk on like AI and software engineering to end this fantastic chat that we had? Or would you really say like I can't think of one thing, which is also
No,
an
I
answer, right?
I agree with you completely, right? If we're so disconnected from what happened under the covers, and what happened under the covers is probabilistic, of course there's that danger, right? And that danger can loop in and of itself, right? If the AIs are self-learning and they see
Mm-hmm.
more and more of the code it writes and it writes crappy or insecure code, then the probability of it generating crappy or insecure code goes up and up, right? I do think this is a risk, especially in the short term, right? People have talked about like bigger ways of mitigating this, right? Like you use multiple AI agents and the AI agents are tuned to do different things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm code genning with a code gen AI agent, but then I have a security agent that reviews the code. And then I have a
Mm-hmm.
testing agent that tests the output of the code to make sure it works correctly. And then I have a UI agent, right, that goes and clicks on the UI and makes sure that the UI works correctly, right? Maybe there's a way to mitigate it using. It's kind of like building out a software engineering team of agents, right? Each person is a separately tuned AI agent that's good at something, right? Maybe as the models get better and better and these agents get better and better, that risk will go down. But I do definitely think that risk is there, right? Especially if you're learning on code that exists out there with security bugs, right? That's one of the bigger issues that people were talking about is that it writes bugs and it writes security flaws, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yes, that's definitely a risk that has to be mitigated. Again, I think it's mitigated by looking at the code. I think it's mitigated by being very deliberate about what you produce. Like the code is still your code, right? It's not some magical object code layer that you can abstract away yet. And I think that is very important. And I think that's also why these tools in the hands of senior people are so much more powerful. Not that junior people can't use these tools to improve quickly and produce a lot of output, but I find like it's like having an engineering team, right? I instead of me talking to an engineer, like one of my engineers about this, I'm like, okay, this is the future. I need you to go build it. The AI, the feedback loop is tiny, right? I tell the AI and it just generates the code, and then I can look at it and be like, no, 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 fix this. No, 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 fix that, right? So it's like talking to an external engineer just with a very, very, very tiny feedback loop, right? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the whole point of that was like I understand the risk you're talking about. Same thing with kind of the self-driving cars, right? I want to like leave out the whole like supply chain, attacking the supply chain of the firmware and everything else, but I do think that the cars probably shouldn't make decisions together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Each car should be an individual unit that operates autonomously as an agent, right? Which is how they're
Mm.
building it, right? They are building
Mm.
car-to-car communication for like traffic or for like accidents or for rerouting and that sort of thing. Maybe it'll get good enough where car-to-car communication is better. But I do think that like the way to mitigate the catastrophic failure where the car-to-car communication fails, right? It makes a decision that is damaging is much less if every car is an agent acting on itself, acting for itself.
Mm. The dream of having basically AI agents, like one is like an agent for security, the other for testing, the third for architecture, the fourth for actually writing the code. This is like the dream, right? This is like, okay, now you have a software team. They speak now about this all the time that like, you're ready, like if you're like your level, like architect senior, then AI in your hands is like basically a small engineering team. If you're like a normal level, mid-level engineer, then like AI is basically a small army of junior engineers and so on and so on. So basically the projection, really, people are always hopeful about new technologies, or well, I mean, nowadays it seems to be again the case, luckily actually. So this is like the projection is like, oh, we will have this, right? We will have what you just said, like you can code basically in English and then robots will build the software. This is like one future scenario. Another future scenario I'm just thinking is like, okay, we had the iPhone, and basically every other iPhone after that is basically the same iPhone that like Steve Jobs released in what, like 2007. It just has like a better camera and the biggest screen. But
And a
like this
faster
could be
processor.
yeah, like kinda,
Yeah.
isn't it? I mean, it's not that.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So it could be
this,
that AI is basically
yeah.
then that, right? That like in 10 years we look at this and it's like, oh, so basically used in a. But of course, like all the AI researchers and so they'll think I'm too pessimistic because
I actually don't
obviously
think
like
so. I actually think there's a lot of debate on this right now, right? Even in the
mm,
community, they're arguing about it, right? Where a lot of people are saying the reason why we haven't seen GPT-5 and the reason why we haven't seen Claude 3.5 Opus and everything else is that these larger models have hit walls, right? When it comes to
mm,
scaling, I can't just throw more data, I can't just throw more parameters, I can't just throw more compute at it and everything works. I'm not on that side of it, so I don't know the answer, right?
mm,
Though I have seen a plateau in ability, right? It kind of feels like right
mm,
now, what they're working on is optimizing model size, delivering the same quality at lower parameter counts, lower compute needed, having mixture of experts where they tune different models, smaller models, right, and have like kind of a uh, another model that decides who to talk to. Um, I mean, this is the right thing to do anyway, right? From a
mm,
efficiency perspective. But what if, like you said, what if the reason why they're doing it is they hit a wall? I don't know the answer to that, right? Sam Altman and OpenAI and all these people argue that's not the case, but other people are
mm,
arguing that is the case, right? So maybe this current transformer architecture and whatnot can't scale to that level of AGI. I don't know. It's just something I don't have enough knowledge to answer. Though I do feel like we're up against some sort of wall right now. I just don't know whether that's an inherent wall that can't be breached, at least with
mm,
current techniques, or that is just what they're focusing on. There's only a finite amount of compute in the world currently, and improving the efficiency of current models is a better use of time. That I can't tell you.
mm. Thank you so much. This was amazing. We speak very soon again, and I wish you all a good day and see you soon.
Yeah, appreciate your time. Thank you for having me.